Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette. We're so glad you're with us to stay curious. In fact, we're right there staying curious on the peninsula of Florida here, the little horn that sticks out there, Merritt Island, all the beautiful launch complexes there, and of course, the attractions just 50 miles away from us here in Orlando. So glad that you've joined us today, spend a little bit of your personal time to hear about some space history today. We've got going to talk about Robert Goddard. We love talking about Goddard. This is the month where he released an important book. We'll talk about that a little bit. The important book on rocket propulsion that was poo-pooed by the New York Times, by the way. We'll laugh about that here in a minute. And we're going to feature STS-72, our good friend Winston Scott, orbiting the Earth with a launch on July 11th. And we will give you some details about that here in just a minute. So some good space news, some current events. But let's kick it off by saying welcome Selvin Trotter to the board today. Yep, Marty's still been a little bit under the weather, but he'll be good to go next week. He's just got that respiratory infection stuff going around, and when you're a senior citizen, you got to pay attention to all that stuff. So, Selvin, you've been doing an excellent job. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you for your help here, and he's monitoring your questions and comments on our YouTube channel here. Hope that you all go back and visit Mr. Nick Thomas's wonderful program about the Apollo 1 crew. All of these are on our YouTube channel archives, but what an excellent job Nick Thomas did of talking about the men and not the tragedy of the Apollo 1 fire. And very appropriate, Nick. We appreciate you endorsing and letting all those astronauts you wrangle out there to watch us. It's very important to our outreach for our beautiful nonprofit here. So, well, let's say hi to a new friend, Chris LeMarie. Chris LeMarie there. I was wondering, why aren't you watching Stay Curious? Okay. And Chris is a photographer from Ohio, the Boardman, Cleveland area there. He is signed on with Florida Media Now. And though we've got Mark Usiak and Carlton Bailey frequently out to Space Center to take pictures for us, we're going to share some pictures of yours from time to time of Chris. So thank you for joining our Stay Curious group of stringers, so to speak, out there. And we'll talk about Chris here in just a second. Okay. Thought I moved those around a little bit, but I guess I didn't. So here we have the U.S. space. We're going to see a couple pictures of Chris's here in a minute, but we also wanted to broadcast that if you're a space worker, here is your website to put your biography. And why do you want to do that? So your friends and family and your heirs will have a permanent record of what you did in America's wonderful space program. Go to the U.S. Space Worker Hall of Honor. That is a link on our American Space Museum website. And you can see your outline like this. This is Mr. James Tully, who spends a couple hours every week putting in the new entries and data. And you might be in there and not know it because Jim has harvested a lot of different company employee roles and put you in there. So he worked for Lockheed Martin and United Space Alliance at Kennedy Space Center in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. You can put photographs. You can put a lot of things on there. Once again, if you're a space worker, check this out and immortalize yourself on our website there. So there's a picture that Chris took, a nice streak shot of the Falcon 9 Heavy that went up last week. Even though it's cloudy, you got a long time exposure, you get some cool looking shots there. And then Chris was out at Play Linda Beach to see a rocket launch out there in the off the beach out there, Play Linda. I've not watched a launch out there. I can't wait to, but it's a great operation there to see Pad 39A, as well as further down would be pads 41 and 40. So Chris, we'll get credentialed from time to time to be on the bases, but we enjoy the people shots just like this. And thank you, Chris Marie, for contributing to our American Space Museum. These wonderful photos there. Well, a little bit of bad news, of course, is the Peregrine Astrobotic Company's moon lander. If it lands on the moon, it's going to be a crash. Apparently, it had a propulsion problem shortly after it separated from the Vulcan rocket of United Launch Alliance that was launched at 2:18 in the morning, Sunday morning. This is a photograph that was sent back showing, obviously, that wrinkled side of the Peregrine is not supposed to be like that. You even see a strut there, has some damage to it. There was an explosion in the propulsion lines on there for some unknown reason. They're talking a faulty valve involved, and this is why going into space with anything is not easy. It's always hard, and that's why there's always these checks and balances. So we feel for them. They're trying to get the payload straightened out so they can harvest some data for the people there. Of course, Celestis had some ashes of human remains on there that were to be put permanently on the moon. They'll have to work that out with their clients. But again, it's hard. It's not easy. And again, another example of getting to space, how hard it's going to be, is it was announced yesterday, a formal NASA press conference, that they're pushing back Artemis 2, they're not even going to orbit the moon, but they're going to go within 5,000 miles of the moon, is put back from November this year to November 2025. And that pushes the moon landing back to at least a year in 2026. There's the astronauts involved with training. Now they're going to have to wait from this date, another year and 9 months at least before they get to go back to space. So we feel for them also, all that training. I think it can be overtrained. We've heard some astronauts talk about, particularly Bruce McCandless, spent 4 years training for his manned maneuvering unit, tetherless spacewalk. And he has said many times before he passed away that he was certainly overtrained for that mission. But again, space is hard. Here's a reminder of where we've been and where we're going by our friend Chris Calley and his beautiful montage there of the Artemis tribute. Chris, we appreciate you letting us share your wonderful artwork and can't wait to see some of your new stuff here. Well, something that we love talking about the American Space Museum is our monuments, and we particularly love talking about the monument at the Mercury area that gives tribute there on the paver on the ground to Robert Goddard. And I always love emphasizing what a genius this man was. He died in 1945, all right at the end of World War II. But in 1937, he could have orbited something around the Earth if he had had enough financial backing, which he did not, partly because of what the New York Times said about him. Well, what did the New York Times say about him, Mark? Stay curious. Here's one of that beautiful pavers, of course, the classic shot of in Massachusetts on his Aunt Effie's farm near Auburn, Massachusetts, where he launched the first rocket. The rocket's inside that metal structure. The metal structure is just to support the rocket engine at the exhaust up there. But the first liquid-fueled rocket was launched March 16th, 1926, all right? A 2.5-second flight that is remains forever in infamy. There is Robert Goddard with one of his rockets when he went out to New Mexico. Specifically, Roswell, New Mexico, ironically, is where his rocket ranch was, so to speak, with a bunch of underpaid workers. He got money from the Guggenheim, his university, and the great aviator Charles Lindberg was in his corner. But when he published his book on January 11th, 1920, A Method for reaching extreme altitudes. All right. This book lays out the concept of using a multi-stage rocket for exploring outer space and reaching the surface of the moon. And it spawned a nightmare of media interest and misinformation, and pushed Goddard to be secretive about his dreams for spaceflight, and had an inner circle that he would not tell about what he was doing except to them. He had lots of patents on rockets, pieces, and parts, but he wouldn't share a lot of his knowledge with anybody. And then when this came out in January 11th, 1920, the New York Times published an editorial claiming, in this story here, a multiple charge system instrument could go up to 200 miles. Bigger rockets might land on satellites, meaning the moon was a satellite back then. That was the word for satellite, was our moon, or satellites around other planets. And the New York Times, a day or two after this, published this editorial. There's another story: hopes to reach moon rocket with giant rocket. So this was quite a fantasy idea in 1920, okay? And the New York Times wrote this absurd editorial that claimed that Robert Goddard, quote, lacked the knowledge ladled out daily in high schools, unquote, and that it was, quote, absurd to believe that rockets could work in space, because they thought you had to have air to push the rocket against in there. Completely called him a crackpot. And that's the New York, the world's, America's daily record of what's in print. And it really pushed him over the edge of to be a recluse. Guess what? July 17th, 1969, the day after Apollo 11 launched to the moon, they printed a correction, all right, to the January 13th, 1920 Times that basically called him a fool. So, Robert Goddard, you were certainly right. He could have orbited something around the Earth in 1937, I'm convinced, as early as that. And of course, we didn't orbit anything, the Russians first, in 1957, 20 years later. Died of throat cancer in 1945, all right? And here's one of his most beautiful sayings. It's difficult to say what is impossible, for the dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow. Epic words for today's rocket renaissance in the 21st century here. So we keep the memory alive for you, Mr. Robert Goddard. What a genius, what a misunderstood genius, and how he is impacting the world today, coming up on 90 years after his death. Well, let's look a little bit more, little more piece of history as I was looking through mid-month of January. Again, on January 11th, though we're airing this show on the 10th today, January 11th, we had a very familiar woman here, Amelia Earhart. In 1935, at age 37, she began her 18-hour trip from Honolulu, Hawaii to Oakland, California, the first person to fly solo across any part of the Pacific Ocean in her Lockheed Vega airplane. Now, you know she's famous for the world trip that she was lost on. That was 2 years later. Selvin, everybody knows that Charles Lindberg was the first aviator, first person to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Does anybody remember who the second person to fly across anything, to do anything was? Of course not. But Amelia Earhart was the second person after Lindbergh to cross the Atlantic Ocean solo. And she did it 5 years after Lindbergh. All right. And I think she did it for money. I think Lindbergh also got a big check. There was like like the X Prize was for the moon, landing something on the moon that was put up. There was some prizes out there for aviation achievements. So when on this date in 1935, Amelia Earhart, on July June 11th, flew solo across the Pacific Ocean. She was the first person to do that ever. And here's a picture of her at Wheeler. She's posed here in Honolulu, and she's posed here in Hawaii, and then back here she's posed landing. And that could be her trip to London. You all that know the photos better than me, her trip across the Atlantic instead of the Pacific. But we just wanted to show the adulation for this woman. Flowers, crowds, they're climbing all over the plane. All right. This was the same WASP motor used when she crossed the Atlantic in 1932. And Lindberg did it in 27. So, and of course, 2 years later, she was attempting to fly around the world with co-pilot Fred Noonan. And on July 2nd, 1937, Amelia Earhart and Noonan disappeared. And that still remains one of the great mysteries of aviation. Well, we're pretty sure everybody's familiar with the speech by President Kennedy that we shall go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Well, that was September 12th at Rice University in Texas, okay? But on January 11th, 1962, President Kennedy gave the State of the Union address to the country, and he talked about going to the moon for the very first time. And here are some first day covers. The drawings are on the left are by Chris Calley, our friend himself, with a stamp that his father pioneered, the first man on the moon stamp there. And these are postal covers from the commemorating Kennedy. But on his State of the Union address on January 11th, 1962, President Kennedy said this: "With the approval of this Congress, we have undertaken in the past year a great new effort in outer space. Our aim is not simply be the first on the moon, any more than Charles Lindbergh's real aim was to be the first to Paris. Our aim is to develop techniques and the authority of this country and other countries in the field of air and atmosphere. An objective in making this effort, we will hope to place one of our citizens on the moon and to develop the frontier of science, commerce, and cooperation that Kennedy felt was the position of the United States in the free world. This nation belongs among the first to explore it," Kennedy said, "and among the first, if not the first, we shall be." And despite some stumbles getting started, we ended up being the first and still remaining the first power in space at this time. So wanted to remind y'all that it was 9 months before the famous speech that you hear over and over where Kennedy first talked to the Congress in January of 62 about going to the moon. All right, we want to talk a little bit about the shuttles of the month of September. I didn't put January, didn't put my meme up there for that, but we have 10 shuttles in the month of January. 55 astronauts can say they went to space in the month of January. Looking for some of my notes on that, Mr. Mark. And one of the important missions was STS-72. In the month of January, we had shuttles came in twos. It's a great beginning month for shuttle achievements. We had 2 Mir space station exchanges between American astronauts. 2 astronauts named Nelson flew together, Pinky and Bill. 2 future NASA administrators flew together. That would be Bill Nelson and I knew I was going to black out on that. Who's Charlie Bolden flew on together on STS-71C in 1986, the flight before Challenger. And so it's a great month despite the 2 tragedy launches of Shuttle, Challenger, and Columbia. But one of the great missions that helped pioneer things for the International Space Station was STS-72. And let's look at STS-72s, as we so often like to look at the patches and what they mean. In STS-72, we love using this book. They are out of sequence. You just can't go in the book to 72, which I should have done earlier. Where is that? There it is. And we use this NASA book, the patch book. A lot of you get your astronauts to sign it. This patch represents orbiter Endeavour and some of the payloads of the flight. You've got the Japanese satellite flyer is free flying there with the solar panels. The inner circle of gold there represents the actual solar, the octagonal shape of that satellite, which is kind of cool. There is the flyer that is attached to the robotic arm, the Office of Aeronautics and Space Technology flyer. And the payload bay contains equipment for the secondary payloads, an altimeter laser in there, ultraviolet backscattering experiment, and 2 extravehicular activities were planned to test the spacesuits to be used on the International Space Station, because this is 1996. And by the spacewalkers were Winston Scott and Leroy Chow, an ESA astronaut. Here are all the astronauts of STS-72. That's our good friend Winston Scott on the left there. And you've got Koichi Wakata's next to him. Dan Barry. Some of you fans of Survivor have seen astronaut Dan Barry years ago. I believe he made the quarterfinals. And I always talk about that when I talk about Dan Barry. I'd love to meet him. Then you've got, you got the commander there, Brian Duffy. He's a great guy. We've met him. Brett Jett was the pilot. And then you've got Leroy Chow there on the right. And boy, they're up there where my knees would be knocking. Selvin up there. They're up there on the top of the scaffolding there, looking down 250 feet, something like that. And they're all smiling there. But here's the launch. Beautiful shot of Endeavour looking as it's crawling up to the remote service structure there that would cover it up and put the payloads in there some future time. All of that has been dismantled and gone, of course. That would be pad 39A. I believe that's probably 39A. And there they are in space, okay. And talked to Winston, who is one of our go-to astronauts for occasionally an event once a year or so. Winston's also the astronaut out at the Space Center. There he is participating in our Shuttle Fest. And Winston is the chief of the astronauts out there at the Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex. So he gets on the phone and asks them, would you love to come out and be escorted around by Nick Thomas or Mark Smith or one of our educators out here, and you're going to have a good time, and we do have a good time. Winston, thank you for doing that job. He took over for Bruce Melnick, who took over for blanking out there, the person who'd done it 20 years, John McBride. So we wish John well. Winston, we got to brag on you a little bit. Here's his beautiful, very well-known photograph of him doing his EVA. They stuck Winston out there to find out how cold they could get him. They made him the coldest person they think they tried to make cold in a spacesuit. He tested the spacesuit's warmth up to, he was in 104 degrees below zero in the night side, in the shadow, in the payload bay. And it still maintained a good temperature inside. Winston says his fingers felt the chill of outer space out there, but he was just fine inside there. Winston, if you get a chance, buy this book, Reflections from Orbit. I sometimes have that right near me because I love that book. It's actually a booklet, one of the most concise astronaut stories you'll ever hear. He's got some great stories in there where he talks about some of the influencers of his life, of course. But what he really talks about that I find so fascinating is he had a dream, Selvin, when he was a boy. And in his dream, he got up out of his bed and floated around the room and then floated around his house. And he remembers looking up and down at the roof of the house. And then he never thought about that dream until he was training and did a spacewalk. It was after his spacewalk, he said, that he really cauterized that dream in his mind that actually happened to him. What a premonition, all right. And what a great guy. He's a trumpet player. His hero, of course, is Miles Davis, but Winston got a scholarship to go to college playing trumpet. He was a trumpet scholarship, then he got in the Navy. He's a Top Gun, and with a handle Slick. So, Slick, we appreciate all that you do for the American Space Museum. We're always happy to talk about your mission. Pulled out a few things that y'all might not see, like we do here at the American Space Museum and some of our archives that comes through the doors. This is a typical sheet of the time of 1996, before everything was on smart tablets and so forth. This was the flow of the launch countdown and various stages of it. And these would be important to the people who were in the Launch Control Center. Also, some of it looked like this. Here is the day pattern. So there you see on the left are the names of the astronauts and what they should be doing at that moment. And sleeping is what you see on this one, but you see all the activities up before they sleep on there. All this was printed out. Sometimes it was sent up on a fax machine or a teletyper up to the space station until we really got into the cyber world. And every mission has a map. Okay, this is STS-72 before it's launched. This is the orbits that it's going to cover in the United States. So this mission particularly stayed in the southern hemisphere more than it did in the northern hemisphere. So as you see in North America, it never got much above the line of Florida and Houston up there to where they could take pictures. So astronauts would see these maps and decide where they would like to take pictures at certain times when it was light out or dark to get those. So wanted to share with you some of the minutia that we see of the shuttle era. And from time to time, you'll see that on our website. And we're having memorabilia shows, and we've got drawers full of this stuff. So we'll be unloading it onto you folks. So again, Winston, looking up always. We love you and appreciate your contributions to our museum and society as a whole. He really is a speaker for, of course, the diversity, and he's always been outspoken about diversity. He supports our birthplace of the movement. Is in MIMS at the Moore Center, all right, where a young couple were murdered, and so we really applaud all aspects of what Winston does, but he's a guy that will tell you first up, nobody has color when they're an astronaut. We don't care if you're a woman or a man. I don't care if there's a first woman and a first person of color or the people on the moon. If it's two women that qualify and one happens to be of color, fantastic. I know we want to do that, and that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's not. But the fact is that these people are highly qualified, and you could probably just pick one out of a barrel, and they could do the mission that they've been working for. So, well, let's think of some other astronauts that are up there as we go away from Winston Scott and STS-72, one of the 10 shuttles in the month of January. But we love remembering our astronauts, crew up there. Expedition 70, Expedition 70 is up there. We've got a mix of 4 astronauts that went up on a Crew Dragon, on Crew Dragon 7. They'll be coming back mid-March when Crew 8 is launched. And then we've got 3 members, a Russian and the American Laurel on the upper right there. that went up on a Soyuz spacecraft, and they're about halfway through their 5 months up there. So we got 7 people on the International Space Station. Guess what, Selvin? No American males are on the space station. 2 American women, all right, but no, and that's Jasmine Mogali there, seated there. She's the commander of Crew Dragon 7. So also have 3 Chinese up there. Here's the International Space Station. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful 22 years we've continuously occupied space. There is a artist rendition of the fully built now Tiangong Heavenly Palace of China. They have 3 tachionauts, they call them, on there. Their spacecraft at the bottom looks like the Russian Soyuz. And what they're going to do is, here's a photograph that somebody's taken of Shenzhou, is their Uber to their space station. That is what it looks like at the bottom in artist rendering. At the top is an actual photograph taken by this Philip Smith. There are a lot of photographers, space photographers, that love photographing the ISS and the Chinese space station, particularly when other vehicles are going to it. They can see them coming and going. Very much celebrated. China is going to space to stay. We had Rick Horner, who works for Lockheed Martin 40 years, on the show last week. Check out Rick's excellent program. Rick told us we are in a space race with China. It's just undeclared. China's going to the moon. China has rover on Mars. China has this, that, and the other. Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that. Just China has a secret space plane, just like we do. Here's sort of the dimensions of the space station in Tiangong. A little bit deceiving because the backbone of the ISS is that all these structures, particularly the solar panels, are attached to, is what makes it so long. We do have the living space of about 7 mobile homes. Think of it that way, while their living space is, like you see there, 3 mobile home units. And less clutter, you might say. Well, the Chinese space station is using more Bluetooth and wireless technology to clear up some of the clutter. But this picture on the left of our Harmony section is 20 years old, okay? This one on the right is only 2 years old. So humans being creatures of habit, I can see that this is going to get junked up quite a bit. Maybe not. Maybe they're all OCD and they can keep things straightened up, huh? What's this? Well, this is the Chinese Space Telescope. It's 6 feet in diameter. The Hubble telescope's 9 feet in diameter, the mirror. They were going to launch this summer. Well, they pushed it back a year. Breaking news here on Stay Curious. It was supposed to go up in July 2024. They're pushing it back to July 2025. Of course, that's all they're saying about it. Must have some more ground tests and so forth to do. Well, this space telescope is going to be in the same orbit as the Tiangong space station so that it can service it, so that it can stay up in space for decades, maybe like the International Space Station. And why not? Once you put a big mirror up in space, it's not going to deteriorate. The supporting systems are. So we're going to have to sit back and wait a year for Tiangong to get, they're not going to dock it to it, but it's going to be maybe 100 miles away in the same orbit so that they can boost the telescope to it and do some service work. Well, I mentioned to you it is spy versus spy when it comes to China versus the United States. Here, just 2 weeks before a Falcon Heavy rocket launched our X-37 space plane, here's the artist concept of the Chinese space plane that's only like 30 feet long, 25 feet long. It could fit in the bay of the shuttle, of our big shuttle. So that's a concept they have up there that pretty much matches ours in many ways. There's our X-37B and an artist concept. We know that ours has a solar panel on it and a payload bay with some some top secret things in there, but also the Air Force has let out some of the unsecretive things of this mission, and that includes all kinds of seeds to grow food in space. So we're testing how long duration seeds can be in space. The last X-37B was up for over 2 years, all right, or almost 800 days. So this one, they'll probably keep up who knows how long. They won't announce when it'll come back. Also, there's other things aboard that relate to going to a Mars mission, like certain fabrics and metals and things like that might be used. They may be having a mechanical system going on to see if it will break down after 2 years in a miniature form till they make it big for the journey to Mars and beyond. So we're keeping our eye to the sky on China, as they also have big plans, as we've told you on Stay Curious, to colonize with unmanned space vehicles the South Pole of the moon and harvest that water that's embedded in the regulus soil of the moon. So, well, hope that you've all enjoyed today's Stay Curious program. And again, we appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. Tomorrow, we're going to feature a little astronomy and talk about this most beautiful of the constellations, photograph I took with a star filter, Orion the Hunter. And Orion is rising in the east at sunset, and when it gets dark, you'll see it on its side, and then as the sky turns, it kind of stands upright as it looks directly south, like this picture's taken. So we're going to talk to you about the wonders and the stars specifically of Orion the Hunter, one of the most well-known outside of the Big Dipper constellations in the sky there. So I hope that you can enjoy that program with us tomorrow as we look up and do a little backyard astronomy on Stay Curious. So until then, Selvin, have we got anything to button up over there with our wonderful watchers?
Well, we have Cynthia Rossi, Dave Stange, Steve J., William Whiting, Tom Uziak, Fox McLeod, Thomas Celentano, Sean Play Too Much, and Marina R.
Marina R. She's in the Ukraine. Thank you, young
yes.
lady, for watching there. And all of you around the world watching. We're so impressed with how you regulars that Selvin just named up are finding this to be your fix, your daily fix, and you are our bedrock, our inner circle. So please tell everybody that we do things on Stay Curious that we think you won't get anywhere else, including not too many personal opinions. Once in a while I throw some in there, but we stick to the facts, and we love our shuttle era and love talking about it every month. And we got some events that I won't start talking about. We'll throw some of those in Friday when we do a little bit of Future Friday of the American Space Museum. What does 2024 hold in store in the future for us? So hope that you can join us tomorrow to learn a little bit about Orion the Hunter, a fabulous constellation that's easy to see in your backyard. Then Friday, we'll talk about Future Friday and events planned here at the American Space Museum. Until then, I'm Mark Marquette, thanking you for your time and saying I can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.